Hello, everyone. Welcome to another soulful sip conversation. As always, I would like to invite you to grab one of your favorite drinks, tea or coffee, or a glass of water, and join me for a sipful and soulful conversation about stories, the power of stories in and around us. When I think about stories, one of the memorable experiences I had was actually during my time in the business school. We had a course named as ALD, Authentic Leader Development. And as a part of understanding our own authentic styles, we had to go through quite a lot of reflective exercises that really helps us to unpack our inner complexities. And one of those exercises was about our inner stories. First, we were asked to write about our life story from a positive point of view, full of successes, bliss, and joy, and everything. Um, then, after that experience, which felt great, we were asked to tell the same story from a negative point of view, reframing maybe those success stories as a reflection of our childhood traumas and stuff like that, or whatever comes to your mind, those mirror reflections of those positives in the negative spectrum. And that exercise was also very eye opening for me to really see how I can share the story of my life from a negative lens as well. And there was some truth in that one too. But the most interesting part of the exercise was when we were asked to reflect about our inner voice. How much of that inner voice is speaking the positive story, and how much of our inner voice is repeating the negative one? That was a deep question. Till that time, I was aware of my own inner stories, but I'm not so sure whether I really consciously pay attention to how much of those stories was really affiliated with the positive side and how much of that were related to my fears, concerns, and quite a lot of inner turmoil. And again, as a part of the team conversations and group discussions, we realized the fact that we can be more compassionate towards others. Like, think about a friend talking about a challenge that they are going through. It's usually easier for us to hold space for them, to reframe their problems and help them to see it from a more positive point of view. But when the same story is happening to us, when the same story is creating some inner turbulence, some emotional stimulation in us, it's not that easy for us to extend the same compassion that we are easily extending to others, to ourselves. And we can easily judge ourselves. We could be so bitter, so cruel, so judgmental, so critical towards ourselves. Well, you did that again. How dare you? You see, you're a failure. How many times I told you not to repeat the same mistake? Oh, here we are. The same fear is coming up again. I told that we are done with this. This and many other stories. And the good part of these stories is the fact that we are the ones creating them. If we can only step back and see our own life story as if it's like a movie on the screen of life, and we're just like an observer. If we can detach enough to give that distance, then maybe we can also treat our lives as if it's an external movie, as if we are speaking to another friend's problems. And then we can extend the same compassion to our own life story because we are simply human. No one is perfect. We are imperfectly perfect human beings with our own vulnerabilities, with our own stories. And yes, even if we consciously try to focus on the good stories, be hopeful about it, it's also okay to acknowledge that there will likely be some negative stories there as well. And they are there to teach us, they are there to invite us to reframe them if we can only step back and extend the compassion, care, and love that we easily extend to others. The second thing that comes to mind when I think about stories is a quote from a well known poet. I hope I can say her name well. Muriel Rukeyzer. I used to live in New York. I almost spent 10 years in New York and primarily in Midtown. And almost daily, I was walking from Midtown East to one of my favorite places, which I call as my second home, like Bryant Park. And I was usually taking the path from East Side to the Bryant Park by the library. And there is a sweet library walk on the 41st Street. And this library walk has quite a lot of quotes from world's well-known authors and poets, and shares quite a lot of lovely wisdom to ground us on our path to the library, on our path to Bryant Park. And although I have been walking on this path, like I said, almost a decade, it took me quite some time to realize this particular quote about stories and the power of stories and what it really means for us, how it really impacts us. And here's that famous quote. It says, "Universe is made of stories, not atoms." I would like to let it penetrate. Well, maybe because I was living so much in the world of atoms, it took me quite some time to really understand and respect the power of stories, the power of our inner stories as well, the power of our beliefs, what we hold as reality in our hearts. And yes, I'm saying this as someone coming from a very traditional scientific background, scientific education, trained as an engineer with a business degree, operating in the specific world of science more than a decade. It took me quite some time to really merge the physical with the non seen stories behind it. And there's actually a space for the stories, for these beliefs, even in science too. I will leverage my background in healthcare. There are so many stories that articulates the power of placebo effect, for example. And for the ones who are not very familiar with what placebo means, you give the patient a drug as one sample, and for the other group of patients, you let them know that they're taking the drug, but indeed what they're taking is just sometimes like sugar pills or something that doesn't have the essence of the drug. What you are giving them is the story that this is a treatment for their pain, for their disease. So you are actually giving them a belief, something that's not seen or something that is really not there in terms of the atoms and molecular structure that it holds. But the scientific truth also reveals that almost 50% of the time, that works because the person believes in the power of it. To me, this is just another important demonstration of the power of the stories that we keep in our hearts, that we keep in our consciousness. Because of how we perceive the world, it's really important for us to really make sure that we have open and clean stories. So our old stories is not really clouding our judgment for the new ones that are waiting for us to discover. And till this contemplation, I didn't really think about the meaning of story or its history. And you might know that I like learning more about history of the words. And story is actually coming from the same root of history. So if we think about the linkage between them, we form up stories in our minds, in our hearts. And sometimes those stories are limiting belief systems because of old traumas. And we carry that history with us to our future. And because we see the world through the lens of those stories, it only allows us to repeat them because we are not open to new stories, because we are not open to new belief systems. I think we have articulated the importance of stories, how it can limit us. And of course, the next ultimate biggest question is what can we do about it? How can we really heal our inner stories if they are not liberating us? If those stories are the limiting ones? And I think the answer is easy. Coming back to our first conversation about us extending compassion and care easily to others. What if we extend the same compassion, care, and curiosity to ourselves? Curiosity is coming from the same root, kura, which means and is affiliated with caring. Just being curious, being open, means I care. I care to open. I care to consider new possibilities. I care to extend the same love I extend to others, to myself. Seen this way, reframing our inner stories could be a very playful exploration of curiosity, where we just sit with ourselves and ask curious questions. Where is the story coming from? Can I tell a different story? What are my stories? How many of those stories are life affirming? How many of those stories are hindering me? How many of those stories are actually coming from a history that doesn't represent me anymore? Or coming from a history that I don't want to see in my life anymore? With care, curiosity, and compassion, can we let things go? Let old stories go so we can open up space for the new ones to come in. There is a famous quote from Jack Cornfield that really highlights the importance of extending that self curiosity, care, and love to ourselves. He says, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is not complete. How can we extend the compassion we share with others, with ourselves as well? If we can just entertain these questions with some curiosity and openness, I think we can discover beautiful stories in us. And hopefully, through their beauty, we can see the world in different ways. By holding different stories in our hearts, we can bring hope. We can bring more beautiful things into our lives as well. Well, I hope this inspires you to be curious about your stories and to give them a little more space, a little bit more hope, um, at the end of this sweet conversation, I would like to leave you with two questions. What are your stories? And maybe the most important one, who are you without your stories, beyond those stories? There is so much to discover in that silence behind our stories, too. With that, we are at the end of this sweet contemplation about the power of stories. I hope you enjoyed. Till next time, remember you are beautiful and you have beautiful stories within yourself. I hope you see them, you discover them, and you share their beauty with others around you too.